Bluegill Gurgler is fish just like a popper pretty much. It doesn't pop quite as much as a cup face popper would pop, but just twitch it a little bit and then strip it across the top of the water, twitch it a little bit, just kind of whatever works with it. But that's generally how I fished it. And I've only fished it a couple of times, but again, caught fish both times with it. Okay, and I will put a list of the materials in the YouTube description. So the Zoom video will be up tonight. It goes up automatically, but I'll post the one out of the camera, the high-res one out of the camera, probably tomorrow.
So you didn't try it as a hopper dropper?
I did not try it as a hopper dropper, but I don't know why it wouldn't work just fine as a hopper dropper. And if I'm going to critique my own fly, I think I have a little bit too much marabou on the tail of this particular copy. I like it a little thinner than that, but it seemed to work fine. Fish seem to like it just fine. All right, so let's get a hook and the vise. And I am using 140 denier in brown. Olive works fine. Gold, black would work fine. And I'm going to start about a hook eye and a little bit more behind the eye of the hook, because you know I like to mark the forward portion of my body with my thread. In other words, I don't like to wrap my thread any farther forward than my body materials would be. That kind of makes a little mark there for me. And so I'm going to start that thread there. That's where the front of our dub body is going to be. And we're going to wrap that all the way back. Doesn't have to be touching wraps. We're going to wrap that all the way back to the bend of the hook, or just above the barb on this particular hook. So, yep, right about the barb. And then bring your thread back up to just in front of the hook point, just where you won't snag your thread on the hook point. Now, the only thing about mini marabou is it varies widely in quality and thickness. And you can see this tip's a little bit webby. If you have one that's a webby tip like that, because it actually looks more like a hackle feather than it does marabou, you can just pick that out, and now you have a nice marabou tail. And so whether you want a thick tail, or I think I put in your packet probably 4 or 5 feathers. So whether you want a thick tail or a thin tail, you can use 1 or 2 of these. And this one's pretty bushy once I picked off that webby piece. And if you don't like the little thin pieces of marabou here, you can also pick those with your thumbnail. Just grab them and pick them off. And now we've got something that is quite a bit bushier, if you want that. Now, I'm going to grab another piece of marabou here, and this is one that is a really nice one for a small one, so I'll go ahead and use this one. I'm only going to use one piece of marabou on mine. And you want it about a hook shank in length, I guess. And so our tie-in point is going to be right where our thread is there. So so we'll measure about that hook shank, transfer that back to our thread, and then move the marabou to our material hand, give it a couple of loose wraps, and then tighten down on it. Now, if it's a little shorter, a little longer, y'all, it doesn't matter. Bass and bluegill eat it. It's a tail. It's fine. Now, if you want to add a little flash to this, certainly add a little crystal flash or anything you want. You can hang legs off the back of this if you want. We're not going to do that tonight, but you can certainly do that. So then, while holding your marabou up, wrap back, kind of hold it up and towards you, wrap back to about the hook point, and then wrap back forward. I'm sorry, the hook barb, excuse me. Wrap back to the hook barb, and then wrap back to the hook point. And then trim off your excess marabou. And I'm going to clean that up a little bit if I can not cut my thread. If you want to wrap, make a couple of more wraps just to get some of those scraggly pieces of marabou down, that's fine as well. Now this little thread base where I tied the marabou down, that's the area in which we're going to wrap our hackle. So the hackle is going to start back at the back of the base of the tail and is going to go to the front part of that thread base. So let's move our thread back to the base of the tail, and which is just above the hook barb, and let it hang there. Now it is your choice on these hackle feathers. Most of the ones that you have are probably a little big for this fly, but one nice thing about a popper or a topwater like this, it doesn't hurt for it to be big, because once it gets in the water, those hackle fibers will kind of flow back. So it can be a little big, but we do want to tie it in by the tip and primarily use these tip feathers. Now you notice the feather has a curve to it. So as I'm holding this in my material hand, I want that curve to be toward the rear of the hook. So in order for that to happen, when I tie this in, I want the curve facing the hook shaft. Because if it faces the other way, it'll go in like a dry fly with those fibers of the feather pointing forward, and we don't want that. So that curve, when we tie it in, we want it toward the shank of the hook. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to spread the fibers out a little bit here and just get me a little tie-in point. And then I am going to tie that in with a couple of wraps, and then just wrap that feather forward to the front of our thread base, and then just snip it off there.
Bill,
Yes, sir.
I didn't quite.
Okay.
Tying it in like this.
No, point of the feather toward the toward the eye of the hook.
Like so.
Yep. And with the curve, with the concave part of the curve facing the hook shaft.
Yeah.
Yep. It's not really critical on the concave part, but it just makes the fibers lay back a little bit better. All right, once you get it tied in, we're just going to wrap this forward, and don't put a lot of pressure on it, because the front of that feather is not, the tip of that feather is not real strong.
The extra part of the feather that's out across the hook, you cut that off?
Yep, you trim off the excess on the tip, yeah. And if you have trouble rotating the feather all the way around, just rotate it to the far side and put a finger on it. And then you can grab it underneath with your other hand.
You got pretty close wraps, right, Bill?
Yep, pretty close wraps.
How many?
Just close wraps all the way to the front of that thread base, or until you run out of feather. And it's not critical, Orlando. You just want a nice little collar back there, and then tie it off at the front. And I've trapped a few fibers there. That's fine. We'll trim those out. We're covering that hook with dubbing anyway, so they won't show. And so then at the end, trim off that excess, and I'm going to come in and trim off those few fibers just to make it look a little neater. All right. And you can see how those feather fibers kind of point to the rear. That's because we tied that concave side toward the hook. Basically, at this point, we have a short woolly booger without the chenille body. Okay. Everybody have their feathers, their hackle? Just about, okay. Zoom folks, are we good on the hackle? Yep, okay, good. All right, now, take one of your pieces of foam. We want to tie this one tan side down. Actually, my favorite color, everybody has their favorite. Catch, what's your favorite color popper?
Oh,
You can only have one the rest of your life. What's your favorite color popper?
actually, I like a blue black.
A Bluegill black. Well, my favorite color is a dark green. I think they call it moss green on a Bluegill bug or whatever,
Yeah.
followed by yellow. But a lot of folks like yellow. So we're going to tie a tan, which is neither one of those colors. And what we want to do is cut with our scissors. Take our scissors and cut a little point on the foam. And the angle is, the steepness of the angle is totally up to you, but I like something about like that, which is probably just under 45 degrees. You don't want it at a real stubby point because it makes it hard to tie in and then fold back over. Because we're going to tie this in and then fold it over. So we want to have a little bit of a point there. All right. So lay that point with the tan side up, because that's what we want on the bottom. So because once we fold it over, the tan will be on the bottom. And it's usually easier to angle it toward you. Don't start with it flat on top of the hook. Start with it at about a 45-degree angle toward you. Now I'm taking my thread back right to the end of my hackle, and I'm going to line up the corner of my cut, corner of my point, with that thread right there. Just like that. Take a couple of loose wraps, then cinch down on it. And then wrap. And you see how it rotated up over the top of the hook? And then wrap that foam down pretty tight. And kind of look at it. See, I really want that to go back a little bit farther. This is probably the toughest part of this fly. It's fine where it is, but I'd really like for that bend to be back against my hackle. So I'm going to try to grab some more foam there. So I'm going to grab my foam a little farther back. Yep, there we go. Now my bend is right against my hackle. There are all sorts of foam poppers out there with wings on the top and extra little accoutrement on it, so to speak, but this is just a basic one that works well. It's pretty quick to tie. All right, next, we want to dub our body, and we're only going to dub to the front, in my case, the front of that initial thread base, because I want to save this part for my whip finish on my head. So we're going to dub from here to here. And this sparkly synthetic dubbing can be a little tough to dub if you try to put too much on the thread at one time. It seems to roll off. So I'm going to dub. You can see that's a pretty thin dubbing noodle, and I'm going to put just a little bit on there and then add a little bit more. And we want a little bit more toward the end of our dubbing noodle, because you can see this part of the fly is thicker back here where we wrap the foam than the front where we just wrap the hook. So we want thinner dubbing here and thicker there. So I've got a kind of a thin noodle here. And I'm going to start wrapping that right there.
So it'll wrap over the
Over the
point of the foam?
over the point of the foam, yep. And I'm stopping right there so you can see how that looks. That's just wrapped over the point of the foam.
So it's wider
At the front, yeah, the dubbing noodle should be thicker as you move toward the front. That way you have a fairly level, I mean, it doesn't matter, but just for the sake of technique, just a fairly level body. Now, that doesn't mean you can build a super thick noodle with this synthetic stuff, but you can always just dub over itself several times. And you just kind of keep wrapping over itself until you have roughly, it's got a little taper to it, but that's fine. And it's buggy, you know, we have fiber sticking out over the eye, but that's okay. If those fibers in the front bother you like they do me, I'm going to trim them off. Now again, I just chose this bright colored synthetic dubbing because I wanted a little flash on the bottom of it. I mean, you could put, you know, if you ever buy a boogle bug, they all have a red spot on the bottom. I mean, you could certainly dub brown here and then get some bright red dubbing and dub you a little red spot on the bottom if you want kind of a hot spot on it or something. So a lot of creativity you can put into this fly. All right, let's fold our foam forward. You don't need to stretch it, just kind of lay it over the top of the hook. And we're going to take a couple of loose wraps right over the foam. Now my thread is right probably about an eye and a half, eye length behind the eye of the hook there. And I'm going to make a couple of loose wraps right on top of each other, and then I'm going to cinch down on those. Another one and cinch down, another one and cinch down, and then you can kind of straighten everything up.
How far behind the eye of the hook?
I'm probably right where I stopped my dubbing, Ed, right? I'm probably maybe an eye length, eye width and a half, maybe. It's not. We just want to make sure we have plenty of space for our whip finish at the end and we don't crowd that head. Now, just to make it easier to work with the eyes, I'm going to go ahead and trim my excess foam off with the eyes. Easier to work with the legs, which go on next. I'm going to trim my excess foam off. And we want to trim it just a bit in front of, and don't cut it yet because the angle's important here, just in front of the eye of the hook, just maybe an eye length in front. And you don't want to cut it square with the foam because, as you can see in this sample, you see how it's cut at an angle and it gives that flat face to the water. So with the foam angled up like that, you want to hold your scissors at 90 degrees perpendicular to the table. Whoops, I guess I'm blocking the camera there, hang on. Perpendicular to the table, and then just trim it straight across. And you can see it gives a little, once it comes back out, the front of the fly will be perpendicular to the water. You could even angle your scissors if you wanted it more cupped. You could even angle your scissors out a bit and have it more cupped if you like. Actually, mine's not totally straight.
My cut ended up probably 3 eye lengths in front of the tip of the eye. Is that too much?
I think it probably is, Carlton, because I think it's going to make the fly skip on the water instead of, and I tried to trim mine and kind of screwed it up a little bit. Okay. I think you could leave it, but I think it's going to make your fly kind of rise above the water instead of just pop a little bit. All right, now it's time for legs. I'm going to give this a couple of more thread wraps there. Now on your leg, we want to fold it in half and cut it at the bend so we have two equal length pieces. Now there are any number of ways you can tie these legs in, but we're going to do one particular way here. And I'm going to fold it in half again. So I've got a fairly short piece here now. But I'm not going to cut it yet, because if you cut it, it's a little harder to keep both of them in alignment. So I'm just going to grab that loop, and with
That's just one side.
this is just one side. That's right. I have about a 2.5 inch, about a 3 inch long piece here. So I've folded the leg and cut it in half, and this is one of those halves. And I then fold it in half. Now you can cut it here again if you like. We're going to in a bit, but I like to leave mine looped. And we'll put the one on the near side first, because what I like to do here is just push it back against the thread and just bring it up over the top of the fly and let it sit right there. And you want the leg about even. We can trim it later, but this one doesn't need to be trimmed too much. I have it a little shorter in the front than I do in the back, but not much. Probably none once I cut it. And I would give it another wrap of thread or two.
Is that on the side?
Yep, it's on the side. And you'll notice whenever you cinch the thread down, the legs get much more perpendicular to the body. If you don't like that, you can make some thread wraps here and widen this notch out a bit, and they won't kick out as much. But I kind of like them kicked out like that. Okay, let's do the other side. Here's my other half. And again, I'm going to slip it against my thread. And I'm doing it on the other side of the hook, so when it gets up to the side, I'm going to leave it right there. And I'm going to turn my vise so you can see that. So now I have it on the side of the hook, just like I did on this side. All right, so let's take a few thread wraps for both of those legs. And if you're like, these legs have slipped under, so you just pull them back up into position. You want them on the side, because if they're underneath very far, they'll foul on the hook bend. Now we're going to leave our loops for right now. Okay. Now all that remains now is whip finish it and trim the legs. So to whip finish, I'm going to grab my whip finish tool, or you can use your half hitch, whatever Rich your preference is. Oh, you're welcome. So I'm going to pull try to do it where you can see it on the camera. I'm going to pull the foam up and move my thread and make a few wraps right behind the eye of the hook. And then I'll take my whip finish tool and you kind of just use it at an angle. And see, those loops on that, on those legs don't hang on the thread if you don't cut them yet. See how they just kind of brush off the thread and trim it off. Massage your legs and get them just where you like, and then cut those loops. And there's a bluegill gurgler.
How's the wood finish work?
Yeah.
Okay.
I turned it upside down so I could see the eye.
And flip. You can do that. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And you know the fish don't see the top, but I'm going to take a brown Sharpie and I'm going to put a few spots on it,
Just lay it on top.
just to make me feel like I'm a popper artist, which I'm not.
The little hook and the loop on.
I'm also going to put an eye on each side.
Forward and turn loose of the wire where you just grabbing the barrel. And you end up with like a figure 4.
Okay.
Just here and just forward.
Here and then bring it back, and it kind of looks like it's all right. And then
That's it. Here's a Sharpie if you want to put some spots on it. Yeah, the fish don't see them, but it makes me feel like an artist. That I can do random spots on the back. Makes me feel like Kurt Dietrich.
So this piece of thread is what needs to go around.
All right, and I am going to put a little bit of head cement on the bottom.
A bit of what?
A little bit of head cement on the bottom. I don't think you have to, but that thread's pretty protected under that foam there. I'm going to put a little bit of head cement there. And that is it. It's a pretty straightforward little pattern. And like I said, a couple of times I've fished it so far, it fishes quite well. It's easy to cast. When I was out at Kincaid Lake that day, it was pretty windy, and it's not that wind resistant. A little bit lighter than a regular hard-bodied popper, but I think you could pretty easily tie these down to a 12. Much smaller than that, I think it would get a little tedious. I tied 10s, and they're almost as easy to tie as this, but this 8's probably the easiest. Okay.
What's the width of the